Welcome back to Marcelian Online, and today we're going to be looking at the most unpopular specs, DPS specs that is in Mythic Plus today, because there's a very important reason, and that is they're still fun. Why aren't people playing it? It's probably because they don't do enough damage, which is just a shame. So in the world of the tier lists, which one is the best one to play and you'll get most enjoyment out of, and which one should probably stay dead? All right. Listen, we're gonna start it off with Affliction Warlock, and this is going to be a personal opinion because probably similar to the majority of the community, I don't like Malefic Rapture spam. To be fair, that's kind of like the second worst thing about Affliction Warlock, and the other one being Vile Taint not actually keeping 100% uptime on the dots. I could live with spamming Malefic Rapture if I didn't have to refresh my dots when mobs had like 10% left HP. That just feels terrible. I need Warlock to have, or Affliction in this case, to have something like what Balanced Druid has when it spams Starfalls and it refreshes the dots, or kind of how Shadow Priest used to have, but at least Shadow Priest now with Shadow Crash can maintain 100% uptime on the dots. It feels very counterintuitive, and it's very inefficient in terms of DPS gains to actually stop doing DPS, refresh the dots for 10 more seconds of, not even 10 more seconds of the fight left to be able to do any kind of damage, because if the dots fall off, guess what? That Malefic Rapture that you probably are hesitant about pressing anyway won't do any damage whatsoever. So in that sense, I don't know, I like Affliction's burst potential, and during its cooldowns it has some of the most dopamine inducing playstyles, but those two aspects of it really suck. And I would be curious to see what Affliction would be like if it was borked out of its mind with the damage that it could do. Borked might not be the right word here. And if people would still play it despite these obvious flaws, or maybe that's what it would take for these flaws to be addressed and reworked. Who knows? Arcane is the worst performing mage spec at this moment, so I have heard some whispers about it coming around and just destroying things, but I haven't seen it yet, and I don't even know if Arcane mages actually exist. They might just be like Santa Claus. Arcane is still fun though, but it does feel like it's suffering, like I've mentioned before, from a lack of identity when it comes to what you're supposed to be doing, at least in Mythic Plus. I don't know what the builds are supposed to be. It seems like 2/3 of the capstones work in AoE, and I can only really have one because the other ones are undertuned or they don't work properly. I cannot even keep up with Arcane anymore. I'm gonna put it a little bit in front of Affliction because it doesn't feel like it's as restricted when it's doing its damage as Affliction, and when it can crank big time. And if it was Season 1 Arcane, it would have been probably S tier because I enjoyed it quite a bit. But that's been like 4 versions of Arcane away, so I don't know what Arcane is doing nowadays. Assassination has fallen a little bit from last season, and I don't know if it deserves it. I feel like Assassination is a little bit more interesting in AoE than it is in single target, and I have been enjoying myself playing it a little bit, so I'm going to put it into A tier. I do think that Deathstalker, which is probably why you're going to be playing in Mythic Plus to begin with, is fun, and to be fair, managing the death mark properly to make sure that you have it on the right target and it doesn't fall off and you're not left without a death mark is really cool. The one big drawback that keeps me from enjoying Assassination to its fullest, most likely, is chain pulling. Maybe it was just my brief experience with Assassination, but tanks everywhere. If you do have an Assassination Rogue in your team, be kind and let the damn man stealth, bro, because you're getting no AoE if you don't stealth. I'm talking about Indiscriminate Carnage that lets you spread bleeds in AoE, that does not activate it if you're not in stealth at the moment, so you kind of have to use Vanish for it occasionally, which I guess that's a good way of doing it, but the flaw is very apparent. Augmentation is going to be surprising a little bit. I'm going to rank it in the middle. Now, it's a dead spec, don't get me wrong, and this probably might be the only spec I would recommend you not to play if you want to push high keys, because its performance is just atrocious. However, if you enjoy it, you can still get value out of it. Of course, you can still play content. Obviously, Augmentation Evokers are clearing plus 15s at the moment, which is still higher than 99% of the player base at the moment, so it's not bad. But it's clear that the devs don't want you to play it. They've kind of been buffing it a little bit to make people feel like they're not ignored, but they don't know what to do with augmentation. The value of it that it brings to a party is in the gutter at the moment, and it's likely due for a rework. Until then, whatever version of augmentation you're playing right now, it's probably not gonna last. But it is fun, and I kind of enjoyed being able to buff people and flying around as a dragon. It's probably going to be at most B tier if this is the case. Outlaw Rogue, is it the most unpopular rogue spec at the moment? I think it is, from the statistics. And I mean, dude, I remember a time when Outlaw was the most played melees, man. I'm gonna put it all the way up into A tier. I'm a fan of Rogue ever since I started maining it more seriously in Dragonflight, and I've always enjoyed Outlaw. Outlaw didn't necessarily change. I don't know if the hero talents elevated its gameplay to any particular level, but there you go. Outlaw is just very solid in terms of how fun it is. I love Crackshot. I love Hidden Opportunity, which are my favorite playstyles to play. I don't know how I feel about Killing Spree and things like that, which is probably why it's not making it into S tier, but it is a rogue spec and you do have a lot of tools. You do have a wide set of skill expression that you can use in terms of Mythic plus dungeon content, where you can CC mobs in different ways, save people, use Vanish to reset aggro. There's a lot of stuff going for Outlaw, and I think probably the biggest issue is its damage, and probably that's true for all of the specs here. Survival notwithstanding. Now, Survival just received pack leader buffs, so as you're watching this tier list, it's very likely that Survival will essentially become too popular for this tier list if we would have made this video like a week later. From the looks of the buffs, the damage is definitely there. Now, in terms of how fun it is, I probably will put it into A tier as well. Dude, there's no S tier spec at the moment? Jeez, alright. Pack leader buffs notwithstanding, I still feel like the hero talent is very, very boring and bland in terms of what I would have expected it to be, considering that I thought that I was going to play in Rexar. Nobody told me I was going to, right? The devs didn't confirm that whatsoever, but come on. Come on. I feel like it's a little bit too passive. And other than that, Survival is just a way better spec now than it has been for a very long time in terms of its overall design. Its problem might still be damage to keep up with, let's say, Marksmanship and BM, which are cranking left and right at the moment. And considering it's a melee spec, it does suffer from that because this is ranged focus season, which is why you're just seeing like 66% melee here, I believe. So to be fair, Survival has an inherent value that the other hunter specs don't have. With you being melee, you can trap targets easier, you can kick faster, which is actually very important in this meta. There's quite a few casts that you want to kick, especially if you push keys higher and higher. Obviously you have Bloodlust, which is the only DPS spec here that provides Bloodlust. So in the scope of ranking the most unpopular specs, in terms of value, Survival might be the best one here. Close enough, because this might be the first S tier, and it's the kitty cat. Bro, I don't understand why Feral isn't played, and this is the exception to the rule, because Feral actually has very high damage. Way high. This is probably the highest DPS spec in this tier list. Maybe because just all of the druids are playing balance at the moment. Maybe because most melees are either Unholy DKs, Enhancement Shamans, Windwalkers, stuff like that. And then just Feral got forgotten. Maybe it's just the stigma of the cat never being a good spec ever. But it is actually performing really well. And in terms of fun, it's just simple. It doesn't try to do anything fancy. And it's maybe one of the last vestiges of fun druid gameplay where, despite its class talents and spec talents being a little bit wonky and a little bit rigid, you can still have quite a bit of fun, and it's responsive. And I think the biggest reason why personally I enjoy Feral the most is its flexibility in doing with melee mechanics. If you've played any melee in any capacity this season, you know that there are so many mechanics that force you to move out of melee. It's just mind-blowing that they pass through the season's checklist. And to be fair, Feral suffers probably the least. I would probably put Survival there as well, because obviously you have bleeds that can still, you know, take damage while you have to move away. You're very fast as a cat with what, 15 to 30% extra movement speed, passive baseline. You can get out of all of those routes in Floodgate easily, so Feral has good things going for it. Frost Death Knight changed from last season, and if this was last season, I would have probably ranked it fairly lowish because it is a diva spec when it plays Breath of Sindragosa. Now you don't play Breath of Sindragosa anymore, and you actually play Rider of the Apocalypse for the first time this expansion with the, I guess, Obliteration, Shattered Frost build, since your tier set doesn't affect your runic power spending damage, but rather Frost Strike, and I think it was Glacial Advance as well. So Breath of Centrigosa just gets, I think, 0 benefits from the tier set. You're just incentivized to play something else, which actually does a very good job at keeping Frost way more fun to play in Mythic Plus right now, because you're not tied to this 2-minute cooldown and having to stick to the target, or you do like no damage whatsoever. The damage doesn't seem to be that great for Frost this season, and it's been a little bit of a concern with the current tier set, and it has been addressed in the PTR. Looks like it hasn't been addressed enough, or it could just be that it's just vastly outshined by Unholy at the moment. However, Rider of the Apocalypse Frost Decay is very fun, and I would put it all the way into A tier. If I had to play Breath this season, I would have probably ranked it all the way into D. And now with Subtlety Rogue. This kind of used to be my favorite rogue spec, and I still don't know if I'm gonna put it in front of Assassination and Outlaw, since I have played this the most recently. They have been dumbing down Subtlety, I feel, and that's just a little bit of a shame. However, I don't think Black Powder spam is interesting, which is great because you're not playing Black Powder in AoE anyway. You're playing, I think it's Trickster, and with Nimble Flurry, you essentially just have AoE by playing single target. You're essentially like an Outlaw Rogue, right? Your single target is your AoE. I do have to say that the double Shadow Dance into triple Symbols of Death into Secret Technique so often feels incredible. During your cooldowns, this might be S tier out of all of the melee specs, but outside of your cooldowns, you are just dog water, bro. This is, outside of your cooldowns, you're just the most boring spec in a game. However, the more gear I get, the better it seems like I'm getting more and more uptime on Shadow Dance, which is great because one of the best things that I found about Subtlety in the recent years was the old Shadow Dust talent that just made Vanish reduce the cooldown of your cooldowns by about 20 seconds and gave you charges of Vanish, and you would just use that to align cooldowns. But now that you have so much access to burst damage, it just makes it really fun, and having those 4 to 5 Secret Technique procs just is incredible burst. You know what? I think I'm gonna put it into S tier. I'm gonna put it, and I really hope that at one point Subtlety can use Gormaw's Bite as a different ability to use, because I think that's actually really fun. And I was debating and putting it behind Assassination, but at least Subtlety has more builds, and that's great because I like variety, and variety is the spice of life. And the spice of life is actually this very season of Mythic Plus that just hits different, man. It's probably, at least statistically, the best Mythic Plus season we've had in years. People are loving it, and if you're not convinced or you want to know why or where do we have this opinion from, we have data to show in this video, and you can click it right here and see what the best season of Mythic Plus can offer you and why it actually works so well with everybody.